I think they touch on something that um, when you get to when you as you go through life, you're constantly reminded that you don't get where you are in life alone.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce herself. Kate, please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kate Schecter. I'm the president and CEO of World Neighbors, a 71-year-old international development organization that works with very isolated rural populations, primarily farmers in 14 countries around the world. And my background is oddly not really in the countries where I'm working now. It's primarily in the former Soviet Union. I was lucky enough to travel a lot when I was a child because my dad was a journalist for Time magazine. And we lived in the Soviet Union, and my siblings and I were the first American children to go to Soviet public school. And I learned Russian, and for many, many years, I worked in the former Soviet countries. But I've been able to take a lot of the things that I've learned over the years from that time and bring them to the other countries where I'm working now.
How many years are you now with World Neighbors?
8 years.
8 years, okay.
So
yeah.
2014 was when I started, yeah.
Wow. And so far, what are you most proud of?
Oh, I would say I'm most proud of the staff. We have a very lean organization.
Mm-hmm.
We, as I said, we work in 14 countries and we reach over 600,000 people a year, but we only have 57 staff, and we only have about 8 offices in the capital cities in the various countries where we work. We work in Asia, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, in Africa, in East and West Africa, in Latin America, and in Haiti. And we have these very small teams of people who are full-time workers, and then they go out and they work with communities and community-based organizations, and they identify leaders to help really expand and reach as many people as we do. But I feel very close to the staff. They're really hard workers, and they're very alone. I mean, even before COVID, they were out there pounding the hillsides, getting to these very distant places many times on their own. And I love going out and meeting the staff and the communities where we work, and kind of getting to hear from my staff, about what it's like to be that kind of a worker, to be reaching the poorest of the poor in the most isolated places where many times no external help has been there before we get there.
Maybe one question about, because you alluded to, COVID and that's still going on. How has that affected the work of World Neighbors?
Well, when I came into World Neighbors was going through some financial difficulties. And one of the first things I did was to kind of push as much of the program, sort of operational aspects of the organization out to the field, and to really cut back on having big offices and cars and this and that and the other thing. And in many cases, if there were only two people in an office in a big city, my argument was, why are we paying rent when you really need to? So a lot of that sort of ratcheting down and starting to work from home and making sure that everybody had very good equipment and doing distance meetings, doing Skype meetings. 8 years ago, it was Skype. Now it's Zoom. And so we were really very, very prepared. I mean, it didn't send the sort of shock waves that it has in other places through our organization. And then in terms of the communities, they are so isolated that we were able to get to them and tell them that we, warn them ahead of time that your older children or your husbands are going to come back from the cities or wherever they're working outside of the villages, and they're going to bring COVID with them. And you need to be careful and follow these thank heavens, the protocols were not so complicated that we couldn't help them to implement them even in the most rural villages. So we've been very, very lucky. Our communities have been responsive. They have gotten vaccines when they're available, and we've helped them. We've done quite a few vaccine campaigns with local municipalities to try to help people to have access. And we have not had the kind of devastation that you've seen in some urban areas.
We will make sure that in the notes of this podcast, people will be able to find the website of World Neighbors, and your organization is also active on social media as well. So we'll make sure our listeners can find everything about World Neighbors.
Thank you.
As well. Kate, well, you know that I started this podcast as a result of a 100-mile walk. It started 10 years ago, and as a result of COVID, I was not able to walk with others. So I thought, okay, I'm going to walk with my guests virtually. And the reason why I started the 100-mile walk is to raise awareness about hunger, poverty, injustice. If I would ask you, for which cause would you walk 100 miles in a week, 15 to 20 miles a day? What would that cause be? What would the reason that you would walk?
I would walk for the primary mission of World Neighbors, which is to help people to help themselves through a process of helping people identify their strengths and then lift themselves up using those strengths. I feel very inspired by the methodology and by the principles that we work with every day. And I would definitely love to do. I mean, I'm involved in something very small where a group of people around the world walk every day for half an hour. And then we send pictures to each other of what we saw on our walk. And it's a sort of mini version of what you've been doing. And it doesn't have the same sort of spiritual aspect that yours does. But what you find is that even though people are doing it mostly for the exercise, there is very much of a spiritual aspect of it in terms of supporting each other and hearing about why somebody couldn't go today. Maybe they're not feeling well or something happened. So I would do it. I would want to take your challenge.
That's great. Well, although I said I will not walk anymore, somebody else has to do it after 10 times. It seems that I might be involved in the 11th walk as well. And besides that, we also developed an app where you can log your miles that you walk. I mean, you're saying that you walk every day, so you can log your miles. You get points for it that you can use to help certain projects of my organizations around the world, because we have a back donor who helps with that. So, no, thanks for sharing that, Kate. What drives you in life? Why, when you wake up in the morning, why do you do that, and what's on your mind?
Well, if I'm to be very, very honest with you, what drives me is my family.
Mm,
The love of my family. I'm newly a grandmother.
mhm.
My oldest child had a baby in September, and
Congratulations.
it's really one of the most exciting. I mean, you hear about it all the
Mhm.
time, and you kind of roll your eyes and think, "Oh gosh, I don't want to be like all those people constantly talking about their grandchildren." But there is such a, I mean, it's such a miracle to see your own
Mm,
child bring another human being into the world, and it's really been very inspiring. And then, of course, I feel that I've been very blessed to have the job that I do. It's such
mm,
a fulfilling kind of work. Of course, there are huge challenges every day, and you wake up and I have a PhD in political science, and of course, I'm a news junkie. So the
mhm,
first thing I do is find out what happened while we were sleeping, and usually it's pretty horrifying.
mm,
But and being in these small, well, then some of them aren't so small. Being in these poorer countries where we have staff who are often risking their own lives to get out to the field, there's of course been many, many natural disasters, political upheaval, on top of COVID and other infectious diseases.
mhm.
So there's always challenges, but as I said earlier, I mean, it's very inspiring to see people really grab the reins and try to help themselves. And in most of the cases, I would say we've been very successful. And it's really exciting to go back to a community after many years to see the changes that have happened there.
Thanks.
Oh, I guess I'd add one other thing.
Mhm.
In this job, I've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of women around the world,
Mm,
and especially women who have been, um, really have not had the opportunities that we have in the West. And many of them have not had an opportunity to be educated. Some of them are illiterate. And yet they are so inspiring, and they are so thankful for our help.
mm.
But you hear these stories of women getting married at, at young ages, having many children, and then finally kind of getting an opportunity to think about themselves and what they want to do in life, and lifting themselves up out of these very, very sort of seemingly impossible circumstances. And that's been, for me, also one of the most exciting aspects of my job.
That's great to hear, because I'm also very passionate about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll have some questions for you about that later. But SDG goal number 5 is about the role of women and gender in general,
Mhm.
and actually the enormous impact that it has if you invest in girls and women.
Yes.
That's great to hear. I would like to go back to your grandchild, about young children and youth. Um, because very, very often when I walk in person with people, actually also when I talk with people online, like with you now, we talk about the younger generation. And because with walking, as you mentioned yourself, it's very often people perceive it as a kind of a spiritual experience. And but then when we talk about that, but the younger generation seems to be different. The way they perceive religion and spirituality. Although some folks I've talked with and walked with said, no, 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 they're very similar. They might not be attracted to institutionalized religion, but they're still
Mhm.
spiritual, they're still religious. What do you see happening among youth in your community?
Well, I have the same feeling that they may not be attracted to sort of organized, institutionalized religion, um, even though we may have tried to inculcate to them in that when they were younger, but they definitely have a longing for community. They enjoy community experiences. I I live in Washington, D.C., and it's very hard to get a plot in a community garden. So you have to sign up years in advance. But I finally got one not very close to my house. And I went last weekend to help with just it was a big cleanup. I think 40 people were invited to come and 25 showed up. But what really I found so fascinating was it was mostly young people. Who came. It was raining, there was kind of this drizzle that we've had quite a bit lately. And it wasn't very warm and it was a little windy. And they came and they were so excited to have this opportunity to work together. They were asking a lot of questions about the gardening and, about the various types of weeds we were pulling and what was good and what was bad. And I thought, they want it as much as anybody else. They need that connection with their fellow human being, and it comes in different forms. It may not be going to church or going to temple or going to mosque, but it's definitely it's a human need, I think.
Interesting that you say that. I mean, working with the soil and looking at doing home gardens, etc. Is also in line with what I heard is that the younger generation is very concerned about climate,
Yes.
taking care of Mother Earth. So yeah, that's great to hear that you observed that, and yeah, thanks for sharing that. Before we started our conversation, we talked already a little bit about, a lot is going on in the world, and unfortunately, many things are not that great. What are some of the things that you worry about at the moment, or maybe let us focus what you worry about most at the moment?
Well, for me, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has a sort of personal aspect to it, and I worry about it a lot. It's something I'm sort of constantly thinking about, and uh, I feel the same despair that millions of us feel about this situation. It seemed like something that couldn't happen, and then all of a sudden it did, and we're all some of us are still kind of in shock from it. I spent many years working in Ukraine. I think the first time I went to Ukraine was right after the fall of communism in 1992. There were hundreds of children on the street children that were during the Soviet period, children were institutionalized. Some were really orphans, but many of them were living in what they called boarding schools, and they were what they called social orphans. Their parents had put them in the boarding schools because they felt that they would get a better education and they'd be better off in these institutions. And all of that collapsed overnight. And you just saw all these children on the streets. And actually, in my work at the World Bank, I got involved in trying to address that problem with the power of the bank. And also George Soros had invested a lot of money in trying to address the street children problem. So that was the beginning. And then I spent many years doing healthcare development work in Ukraine. And I've been to all these towns that you see being destroyed now: Kharkiv, Mariupol, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Kiev, of course, and Lviv. And I have many friends there. And so that's something that I can't say I feel despair, but I definitely feel anxiety about it.
And I'm assuming that you also still have connections, with the people in Russia. But yeah, my first question is, so it's okay. What are they saying to you?
Well, honestly, we're not really communicating. I think it's risky for them. It's so reminiscent of my time when I was a child, and we knew our apartment was tapped. We knew that we were being listened to. If people came to visit, we wrote notes to each other. You're always thinking about what were the ramifications of these Soviet people communicating with Americans, and how, once we were gone, what would happen to them. And my father, of course, in reporting for Time magazine, he met many dissidents and people who risked their lives to talk to him. And actually, that's the way I feel right now about my Russian friends. I have not reached out to them. I think I've done it mostly to protect them. I'm friends with a lot of people on Facebook, and those connections have been blocked. And so for the time being, we have to all just accept that it's too dangerous to talk to each other.
Where do you still see hope?
I, like many Ukrainians, believe they will prevail. I am a little surprised at how well the Ukrainian army has done, but I think also all the assistance we've been giving them has been essential. And I hope we will continue to support them and to help them win this fight. I believe that ultimately it's the passion of the people to save their own country that will prevail, just as in many other wars, that's been the case. And I also think that this is a case of the most of the world understands that this is craziness, and that there is right and wrong, and this is wrong. And we can't, it's not really something you can debate. That this is just craziness to go into a country and destroy it the way they have. And so, given the fact that there's such unity in believing that this is wrong and it needs to be stopped, I have a lot of hope that it will be stopped.
A part of where I see hope is the fact that as a world we identified 17 goals that we said if we are going to achieve those goals before 2030, our world is going to be better. You can debate that if 17 is too much or too little. But if I ask you, what do you want the world to know about 17 Sustainable Development Goals? What is it that you would like to mention?
Well, I think we were headed in the right direction before COVID. And for the first time in recorded history, we really were starting to tackle a lot of these massive problems that people thought were impossible to conquer. We had more and more girls going to school. We had much more food security than we had ever had before. People had access to water. We were starting to have more and more people, lifting themselves out of poverty and getting to a higher level of income. Things were on the right trajectory. And I think when you saw that happening, you knew it was possible. Now, of course, with the 2 years of the devastation of the pandemic and things coming to a grinding halt, we've lost a lot of that momentum. But given that we saw it once, I believe we can see it again.
And no, I agree with you. A group in the world, and it's growing now, is also saying, one of the reasons that we are going slower than we should is because we need to work on ourselves and as community to work on our abilities and skills to ensure that those 17 goals will be achieved. And they came up with the inner development goals. That's the result of those are 5 goals that they identified as a result of a survey that they did among more than 1,000 people around the world. I don't know if you've heard of them, but do you have any thoughts on that particular concept that you need as an individual and as a community that you need to?
Well, honestly, before I had quote unquote met you, I haven't quite met you. person yet, but we've met online.
Yeah.
I had not heard of the inner development goals, but I looked them up, and I'm
Mhm.
very thankful to you for teaching me about them. And I'm eager to learn more, and to participate in the development of those goals. I think they touch on something that, um, when you get to when you as you go through life, you're constantly reminded that you don't get where you are in life alone, that
Mm.
it always takes others who are willing to mentor you, to guide you, to give you advice, to be your friend, but also sometimes to be a facilitator in this world that's not so easy to get through. And then to, gradually try to do that for the next generation, so that you realize I wouldn't be where I am today without all of those people who helped me. I mean, it's that old idea of the village, that it takes a
Mm.
village to bring a child up, but it takes many villages for people to get where they are, in positions of leadership. So I really love this idea of kind of examining what more can I learn about myself that will help my organization and the people that I'm leading in the organization, but also just to know yourself better, to
Mm.
understand your own fears, anxieties, and then to be able to be more creative. I think one of the biggest roadblocks in being so busy all the time and running an organization, there's not a lot of time for creativity, and for allowing your mind to just relax and think about art and making things,
Mm.
and allowing yourself to write maybe stuff that isn't related to international development. And so I look forward to that. I hope that through learning more about the inner development goals, I'll be able to do that.
Let me dig a little bit deeper and ask you the following question. But this is about you. If I would ask you to mention a song or a piece of music that embodies for a big part of what you are about, which song or piece of music would that be?
Well, there's an old folk song. It's an American song called "The Water Is Wide," and it's actually kind of a sad song. It's about how the water it's very far to get to the other side, and it it's been sung by various different musicians over the years, but the apparently the original lyrics were that that love, it flourishes when you're young, but then it dies when you get older. And my husband and we got married pretty young, and we changed the lyrics to
Mm.
say that love is really exciting at the beginning, but it stays strong and just gets better and better over the years. And the song is about how far the water is, and you can't do it alone. You really need each other to row the boat and get across. And I love that metaphor. I think that captures so much about life in general. So I thank you for letting me know ahead of time about thinking about a song, because there's an awful lot of songs I love, but that one is really kind of a core song in my life.
And is there, because you said there are several renditions, is there one rendition that speaks especially to you, or it doesn't really matter?
James Taylor did it many years ago.
Okay.
A beautiful rendition of it in
Okay.
the original lyrics, which are a little depressing.
Okay, but we will keep that in mind when we are going to listen to that song.
Okay.
And again, to a reminder to the listeners, we have made on Spotify a song list with all the songs that are picked by my guests. So it's becoming quite a list of interesting songs of all kinds of genres, from classical to R&B to heavy metal and
Uh-huh.
folk. So I would encourage you to check that out. Kate, we have a lot of discussions within CWS, my organization, about that our sector, the NGO sector, is changing, that we need to look at, what type of changes we need to make in terms of our business model and how we work with younger generations, etc. What do you see happening, and how do you try to ensure that, World Neighbors stays relevant, but also will be able to continue to do the work that it needs to do?
Well, I think one needs to accept that that kind of change is happening constantly.
Mm,
It's not something that's new. I mean, it's just the nature of life, is that there are new ideas and changes constantly happening, and so we are a part of many networks. For example, in around the world with other farmers who might not be working with us, but there's all kinds of innovations happening in agriculture now. There's all kinds of ideas about how to deal with water shortages or flooding, or all the implications of climate change in terms of agriculture and creating food security around the world. So we're very involved. We are involved at the very grassroots level of the farmer, all the way up through university research that's going on and into
mhm,
government research as well, and government policy development. I mean, that's I think what makes the work so exciting is that you're constantly learning.
mm,
You, you think you know about organic agriculture and sustainable agriculture, and of course that is, and you would think that would be something that wouldn't be changing so
mm.
dramatically all the time, and yet, given all the circumstances that we're dealing with, it's an ever changing area. I think that you could say that about pretty much every sector that we deal with. One of
Mm,
the things that I really love about the World Neighbors approach, we are not a one sector organization. We believe that in order for whole communities and people to really lift themselves out of poverty, we need to address all the different aspects of their lives. And so we take a very holistic approach to development. And that can take a long time. You could be addressing the most urgent needs of food and water and security, and then then gradually get to other areas like education and making sure that women are having a voice in the community and many other things, so that once we leave these communities, which we always have an exit strategy from day one, we feel that they're able to be on their own, and they've addressed all the myriad different issues that they need to. So in terms of that issue of change and young people coming in with ideas, I actually find that to be the most thrilling aspect of the work.
My organization celebrated last year its 75th anniversary,
Mm.
and I think World Neighbors is also getting close to that. One important topic that we are looking at in terms of, did we do well and how should we do better, is around racial justice.
Mm. Mhm.
As an organization, as well as our programs, did we address it properly? Um, if I ask you to look at the NGO as a sector, and I know it's different and difficult to generalize, but I'm asking you it anyway. If you look at the NGO as a sector, how did the NGO sector do in terms of racial justice? And what should it, do for the future? Or are we doing everything just fine?
I think there are two areas that really need attention.
Hmm.
One of them is, before I worked for World Neighbors, I worked for another NGO that got most of its funding from USAID, or CDC, was healthcare development work. And then I worked at the World Bank. And we still have in the United States, in the development sector, a bias that uh, that experts, Western experts, agriculture experts, economists, health experts, they're going to be able to give better advice than a local person. And through my work with World Neighbors, I've changed my mind about that quite a bit. I think that local experts, there are many of them. They speak the language. They are from the places where we're trying to make this change, and they are much more effective almost all the time than bringing in external experts. And I think that bias then is, you see that in the United States, especially, I can't really speak for other countries where there's sort of a big international development sphere. It's not a racially diverse group of people, maybe at the World Bank, but other than that, in most of these organizations, we don't have a lot of African Americans. We don't have a lot of people from Asian descent. It is not a highly diverse group of people who are developing these ideas that we're talking about, the sort of ever-changing innovations that are happening. So I think we need to do a lot of work to try to bring in a more diverse young population, teach these issues in universities, and then encourage people from many different backgrounds to come into the field. And then it's related. The second issue I think that's really problematic is that we tend to believe that a Westerner is a better chief of party or, sort of head of the organization in the field because they have native English, they write English better, and they're going to be able to sort of manage the donors better than somebody who's local. And maybe that's true. But if we're really trying to create capacity on the ground, which all of us say we're trying to do, then we need to be hiring local people more.
And are you good at that at World Neighbors?
Yes.
About the two issues that you just mentioned?
7 staff, of which 53 are all local people. They come from the countries where they work. They speak not only the primary language, but many times dialects of those countries. They have expertise in various sectors. They're great. They're fantastic staff, and they also have this kind of that you're not going to have if you're coming from overseas.
I actually wanted to ask you a question, because you, in the beginning of our conversation, you alluded to, the empowerment of women, giving opportunities for girls. If you look at your own career, so is there a lesson that you learned that you would like, to share with the young girls out there who also ultimately would like to be in a leadership position in the work, in the sector that you and I work?
That's a tough one. I think there's still a lot of obstacles for women. I mean, they're not necessarily at the lower or middle management level, but once you start getting into top leadership positions, you don't see a lot of women. World Neighbors was a member of Interaction for a long time, and they had a separate kind of retreat for women CEOs of NGOs, and it was not a big group. I was really pretty surprised. And there are very powerful, fantastic CEOs who are women running some of the biggest international development groups in the world, but the obstacles are still very much there, and it's a lot of the things that held me back are still in place, and so it's still going to be a tough uphill climb for a lot of young women. Unfortunately, that's kind of a negative, kind of a depressing message, but it's just the reality that I've seen, unfortunately.
Yeah, these type of conversations go always fast. Yeah, any last message that you might have for the listeners, or an invitation that you have for the listeners, or a question that you have for the listeners?
I guess one thing that I always like to talk about when I'm giving, lectures at universities or speaking with civic groups or any kind of opportunity they have is that, and it's kind of it's a moot point for the people who would be listening to your podcast because they clearly are global citizens. They're interested. They want to hear what people are doing out there in the world. But I would encourage them to continue to be clued into what's happening in the world. You obviously care, and there are many things that people can do. I know sometimes it feels like your little bit is not that important, but it is. It's very important. And as we talked today about community, the more you can gather a community together to share your ideas, to share what other people may have to offer, the better. I think one of the things that's happened with COVID is that we've become so kind of atomized. Everybody's had to stay isolated and in their homes, and we need to get back to mechanisms for sharing with each other and hopefully pretty soon being able to get out into the world again and travel and become involved with our fellow humans.
Yeah, any question that I should have asked you and didn't?
No, I was waiting for you to ask me about the song, and you did. I guess I would like to ask you if you could
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about how, I know that your position is in measurement and kind of looking at impact. Could you tell us a tiny bit about how you do that? Because that's a big challenge for everyone in my work
Yeah.
sphere.
Now you're asking me a very difficult question.
Oh, sorry.
No, but I will try. And no, so it's a position that I recently took because before I was our executive vice president, more
Mhm.
responsible for strategy. Since the beginning of the year, I'm the chief sustainability and impact officer. And there are two or three things that I can say about it. One is it's still a job that is evolving. Especially the sustainability title or word is used to look at sustainability really in the widest sense of the word, a broad definition, looking both at the sustainability of the organization as a whole, as well as, contributing to the sustainable development goals, to
Mhm, mhm.
put it simple. Impact has to do with, that, time is ticking. And how do you get, in business terms, the best return of investment? And again, that's broader than maybe the business point of view, where you look at the dollars. No, it's also investment in girls and women, and how they will contribute again to those 17 sustainable development goals. But why I was looking at why I came up with this interest in the inner development goals, Kate, is, if you look at impact in making a difference in the world, it was also about why going back to the mission and vision of the organization, the purpose, why are we there? And again, the most simple translation for me, and that's still part of the discussion within the organization, is how do we contribute to those 17 sustainable development goals that we as a world identified? And how can you do that in the best way? And then I realized, in order to do so, you also need to develop yourself. You need abilities, yourself, and skills, as well as community.
Mhm.
So that's the people who are working for CWS and our partners. So it's something that we are still trying to figure out, and how you measure that. I hope I will have an answer soon. But looking at the situation from a distance, and how do you make a difference? It's about, how do we develop ourselves in such a way that we really make progress in this world, and make this world develop sustainability, make an impact, and make ensure that our children will have a future.
Mhm, mhm.
But
Very, very interesting. And I think this idea of inner development goals is going to be very appealing to everybody as well.
yeah, I mean, I also, it's not to say that you don't need data. Of course, you need data as well. Absolutely. And science is important as well. But I think the way the inner development goals are developing and are evolving is also looking at that. It's also about really developing skills and abilities to move our agenda forward. And the 17 sustainability goals are very tangible.
Hmm.
Not always easy to measure, um, especially if you have relatively smaller type of projects. But yeah, so I don't know if it's a helpful answer. It's still developing, but what I really like about the fact that we came up with this title is that I think we started the right conversation. Now
Right.
it's yeah, making it part of our agenda and not talking about, when you talk about COVID, for example, for me, it's not going back to what it was before. It's how do you deal with the situation that we have now? And,
Right.
even if COVID is going away, influenza will be there. So what does that mean for us as an organization, as an individual? If we think about travel of coming together, how can we learn from the last 2 years to make it still making these Zoom calls that you and I have now very valuable and continue to be valuable? It doesn't mean that there is not an added value if we meet in person, but maybe we can be smarter on when and where we meet and how. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Fascinating and creating kind of depth that most people don't really bring to this question of sustainability and impact. Um, as you say, of course, data matters, but there's so many other aspects to what happens when people really change and they are able to get out of this level of poverty where all they can think about really is their next meal,
Mm.
and start to think about many other aspects of their lives, uh, improve their health, improve their education, and then, of course, help their children to have much better lives than they led. So it's very, I think I mean, I've learned a lot from both preparing for and then listening to you today. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you. And that's what I hope, this podcast is contributing a little bit to, is it's built on the premise that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial, so that you
Mhm.
see that, you can build on, even if the commonality is small, that can be a start of a dialogue, a conversation, and even collaboration ultimately. So yeah,
Which
I
is so
hope that the
important
podcast
days that
is
we
doing that.
find ways to talk to each other and
Mm.
listen to each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
listening especially is
Mhm.
is really important. We should, as a world, listen more. And I think we'll make big strides forward. Yeah, thank you so much, Kate, for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. So as I always do from people I talk with, is pretty amazing. I feel so privileged always. So yeah, thank you so much, and good luck with everything you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.